In this video, we are going to talk about flex boxes. And after watching this video, I am 100% confident that your concept related to flex boxes will become very clear and you will not struggle with flex boxes. So, what are flex boxes used for? So, in CSS, you have two things, you have grid and you have flex boxes. Now, you have to use flex boxes whenever you are working with one dimensional layout. And when you're working with two-dimensional layouts, in that situation, you have to use a grid. Okay, so this is the fundamental rule. So for example, let's say you are building navigation, right? So if you are building a website and you have to build the navigation, in that situation, you have to use this flex box. Okay, so if let's say these are your navigation, in that case, you can use a flex box because it is a one-dimensional layout mechanism, right? So it is a way of painting things in one dimensional. So this can go horizontally or this can go vertically. Okay, so you can also like have this vertical direction. So this is this is like any one of them. Okay, you can either have one of them, or in the grid. So in the grid you have two dimensional layouts. So you have this, you can imagine it that way. So let's say you are building a gallery. In that situation you have the grid. Okay, so grid is useful in that situation. So whenever you have like two-dimensional layout, in that case you can use grid. But in this video I'm not going to focus on anything else. I'm simply going to focus on the flexbox, and in the next video I'll talk about grid. Okay, so let's see what this thing is. Now there are few terminologies that you have to understand, and the first thing is this parent container. Parent container is something that is called the flex container. Okay, so this particular container, it decides how to display the elements within. And when you say that you want to display the element in flex manner, so it is going to become the flex container. Okay, now these divs that you see inside, so all the boxes, they are called the flex item or flex items. Okay, combined. So they are kind of like, or like they are called the flex items. Okay, so this is how you can like name them. So you have these two things. Now you have the concept of cross axis and main axis. Now these are two important concepts. Okay, because if you do not understand what is the main axis and what is the cross axis, then you will struggle with flex boxes. But if you know them, then you will be able to easily work with flex boxes. Now let me tell you what these two things are. So main axis is nothing but it is the direction in which the flex box is currently laid out. Okay, so for example, by default, this flex box is laid out in this horizontal direction. Okay, so it is kind of like in the direction of a row. So if you have a table, then you have the row and you have the column, right? So by default, it is in the row direction, but it can also go in the column direction. So you can also rotate this thing in this direction. So you can also have in this direction. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. So if I am rotating this thing, I can rotate this thing in this direction. Okay, so this becomes my this is right now we can see that this flex box, this particular flex container is now in the vertical direction, right? Now what is the main axis and cross axis? So the difference here is that main axis is always in the direction of the uh, flow. So in whatever direction this flex box is being laid out, that is the direction of the main axis, and the cross axis is the direction which is perpendicular to the main axis. Okay, so this is the difference. Now if I rotate this thing, now my flex box is laid out in the this horizontal direction, right? That means the main axis is in this direction and the cross axis is in this direction. That means there is it is perpendicular to the main axis. So this is something that you have to understand, that the direction of this particular flex box determines the direction of main axis. So this is the main axis. Okay, let's call this MA, and perpendicular to this we have the cross axis. Okay, so this is the cross axis. So this is all you need to know, that in whatever direction the flex box is flowing, that is called the uh, you know main axis, and the direction perpendicular to that is the cross axis. Now why these two things are useful is because main axis has some properties and cross axis has some properties. Okay, and we are going to use those properties to kind of, you can say, align our elements within the flex container and do some manipulation on them. Okay, so this is the whole idea here. Now there is something that you have to understand, one more thing. You have the concept of positive and negative spaces. Okay, so right now you can say that this particular entire box has some width. So let's say the width of this entire box, let's say it is 400 pixel. Okay, now like even the inner boxes, they have some width, so let's say it is 20 pixel. Okay, now let's say this particular part, this leftover part, this empty part is like 200 pixel. Cool. Now the thing here is, you have to understand like the combined width of these boxes. So let's say, let's ignore the these gaps here. So let's say the combined width here is 100 pixel. Okay, so let's say the combined width is 100 pixel. You can also like keep it 200 pixel, but I have assumed 20 pixel for each box. So combined we have 100 pixel. Okay, so let's say we have this 100 pixel. Now this leftover, that should be 300, right? So let's say this is 300. Now the thing is, we have 300 pixel left. Okay, and what we are going to do, this much space is left inside the flex container. Now what we can do with this leftover space, we can distribute the leftover space to adjust the width of the boxes. Okay, we can do that and do some manipulation of these boxes, right? So we can add some width to these boxes and increase their sizes in a way so that they kind of like end up filling up the entire container. So this is something that we can use. So this is the whole idea of this leftover space, and this empty space, or whatever this left free space that we have, that is called the positive space. Okay, so we can like let's erase this thing. So we can call this empty space as the positive space. Now we can use that space and we can kind of like give that space to the boxes. So for example, I have, if I have 300 pixel here, so if I have 300 pixel here, what I can do, I can like I can divide this by 5. Okay, so I have total of 60 pixel per, right? So I have 60 pixel per box. Okay, so what I can do, I can add this 60 pixel to the 20 pixels, and each of the box will be 80 pixels, right? So the moment we have each of the box as 80 pixels, so what will happen, each of the box, now will become my entire container will become like filled with these boxes. So each of the box will become 80 pixel. So let's assume like this is, so let's say these each of them are 80 pixel. Okay, so I kind of like so these are like 80 pixel. Now our entire container is filled, there is no more empty space left inside that. Okay, so this is how we can kind of like distribute this empty space, and we can do some like manipulation on the size of the boxes and even adjust accordingly. So like this is how it is used. Now let me tell you, there is also the concept of negative space. Everything will become clear once we start talking about this, you know, when we start coding. Now let's say this is my, this is my main div, the flex container. But here, what we see here, the size is now, let's say, reduced. Okay, now let's say this size is now here, and these two things are like overflowing. Okay, now let's say this is my 100 pixel space. Okay, so let's say this is 20 20. Okay, so let's say this is 40 pixel that is overflowing outside this particular area, right? Now this particular area, let's say this is overflowing. Okay, so this is like 60 pixel. Okay, now what we can do, we can kind of like this particular extra space that is going outside the container, that is called the negative space. Okay, that is called the negative space. The idea here is to distribute this negative space in a manner so we can use this negative space, and what we can do, we can like perform some calculations. So like on the 5 boxes, what we can do, we can divide this by 5s, and we can reduce 8 pixels from each of them. And once we do that, this entire thing will we can cut some pixel from this, 8 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 pixel from this. And once we do that, the entire box will fit inside this particular uh, you know um, container. So we'll have 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we'll have these 5 boxes inside that. Once we reduce the whatever this thing is, we can divide that negative space, and we can reduce that. So this is how you kind of you can adjust that. So this is just something that I wanted to show you, that you have the concept of negative space, and you have the concept of positive space. Now how they are useful. So in CSS, you have some properties like flex basis on the flex items. So on these boxes, you have properties like flex basis. Now, what is this flex basis? Flex basis determines the initial width of that thing. Okay, so whatever the width of that thing is, so you can consider this as the 20 pixel in our case. And you also have something called flex shrink. Okay, now this flex shrink is something that is used to kind of, you can say, proportionally reduce the size. So as I explained, so if you have some negative space here, then that will be proportionally reduced. So if you, let's say you are writing flex shrink as 1, in that case your space will be proportionally reduced by 1 from each of the element. Okay, so this will become clear when we start discussing. So right now when I say the flex shrink 1, in that case each of the box will get rid of 8 pixel, and then they will automatically get fit. Now let's say on some box I have flex shrink to 2. In that case the twice the size, so kind of proportionally things get reduced. So it's not like whatever space that you have, from that space proportionally everything is reduced. So this is the idea behind flex shrink. Now for this flex shrink is for the negative space, and for the positive space you have your flex grow. Okay, so you have flex grow for the positive. Now when you say flex grow 1, in that case the previous condition that we discussed, that means if let's say there are some extra space here, then each boxes will get that much proportionally in equal proportion. They will be adding the space so that they end up filling up the entire empty space. Okay, and they end up occupying the entire box. So this is the idea behind flex grow, flex shrink, and I'll talk about this once I show that to you. Everything will start making sense. Okay, now that we have this fundamental concept, let's try to code and see how they actually work. Okay, so right now I have this HTML document, and in this I have this one div, and I have named it as class box, and inside this I have box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5. Okay, and I have also added some things here, some other divs, but I'll be using them later on. Right now I have their class name as child, but in one of the div I have one of the divs I have this h child. Okay, that means special child. Now I have written some css, but just I have given the borders so that we can have some visual clarity over how things are on the screen. Okay, so default these boxes are in the block format. So if you go here and you will check, the display is in block, right? So if you hover over on the elements, you will see that they are in the block, right? So if you want them in flex format, you have to use this display as flex. The moment you do that, notice how the all the 5 boxes, they are kind of congested on this left hand side, right? So they're at the very beginning of this flex. So this particular flex container, they're at the very beginning of this thing, and they're in this direction. Now the thing here is you have to understand that what is the main axis and what is the cross axis. Right now by default the flex is always in the row direction. That means it is always horizontal. Okay, by default. So in this case this particular direction is the main axis. Okay, so this is the main axis, and this particular direction, perpendicular direction, is the cross axis. Now let's say if I want to change the direction of this thing, so there is a property called flex direction. So the moment I change this to column, what will happen? This is going to become my this now we are vertically. So the vertical direction is now my main axis, and this is going to become my cross axis. Okay. Now notice here, if I use this row property, this is the default behavior. Okay, so this is the default property. Flex direction has the display row as the default property. So just keep in mind that this is whatever this, when you have the row, the main axis is in the row direction. When you have the column, the main axis is in the column direction vertically. Okay, so right now I'm just going to work with the row, so let's keep it there. But if in case you need to have a layout in this direction, you can use column. Okay, now that we have these things, let's try to look at a few properties. So on the main axis, you have a property called justify content. So justify content works on the main axis. That means the direction in which the container is laid out. Okay, so you have this thing called justify content. Okay, now what this justify content is? Justify content is on the flex container, and it is always in the direction of main axis. Okay, and justify content is something that you can use to justify all the boxes, like how to space put them inside the flex container. Okay, so let's say you want to put all the boxes, this entire element in the center. Okay, so what you can use this center, and everything will move to the center. By default it is flex start. Okay, so by default it is the flex start, so that's why you see these things here. And if you use center, it moves to center. Okay, and in the same way you have this flex end. Okay, so the moment to do that, it is going in this direction. Okay, so it is going to the very end. Okay, and similar to that, you have start. Okay, and you have end. Okay, now where these start and end are kind of something that is dependent on the kind of language you are using, the direction in which you are writing. Okay, so if you're writing in some other language, start and end may vary. That's something I think you should not be worrying about at this moment. But note that most of the time you will be working with a center, and then there is something called space between. So this is something that you will be using most of the time. So this space between, what this does, it's kind of like, it's putting the boxes in this manner. There is equal space in between each of the box, and what you see here is the first box is at the very beginning, the last box is at the very end. Okay, so this is at the flex start, and this is at the flex end, and then there, whatever the leftover space is, whatever the positive space is, that is being equally distributed. So it's kind of like that is working as the equal distance between the boxes. Okay, so this is how space between works. So this automatically distributes the positive space, so that we can have some space in between those things. Okay, now apart from this, you have space evenly. Okay, sorry, you have this space evenly, and the moment you do this, what this happens, there is equal space between each of the box, and then you have this space, this space here, and this space here, and these two things are like, the width of these two spaces are like, same as the space in between the boxes. So this is something that you have to understand, that when you do space evenly, there is a space, it seems like space around the boxes, but each of the space that you see, they are of equal width. Okay, similar to this, you have this space around. Okay, now what this does, so this does the same thing. The only thing that differs here is that there is going to be equal you know a space between the boxes, but around them you will have a small width. So it is not going to be equal, same as the space evenly, where the width was similar everywhere, but here you have a small width here. So this space around is kind of like used when you have to give some breathing space around the box. But you can also use space evenly if you need even spaces everywhere. So a space around is something kind of like one step below that space evenly. So it does not give you the equal width everywhere. So this is how you can use that. This property is on the main axis. Okay. Now on the cross axis, you have something different. Okay. So let me do one thing. Let me first, and give a width to this thing. So let's say the width is 300 pixel. By the way, without the width, this is how Flexboxes work on the full screen. So right now, I do not have these things. So by the moment you do that, so this is how it is going to look on that full screen. Okay, because we have not specified the this entire any specific limit to that thing, right? So this is why it is working that way. Now the moment I do this width, so there is a specific width to that, and right now we have 300. Okay, now let's do one thing. Let's justify content to flex start, which is the default value. So the moment we have this, we have the width of 300 pixel. Now each of the box, let's look at like the box width. So each of the box is right now 36.67 pixel, and the main box here is 302 pixel. Okay, now what happens here is, like, if I want to give each of the box some weight, I can also do that. So I can give some weight here. So let's give them 40 pixel. So by default, the width that you were seeing here, 36 point something, that was coming from the content width, whatever the content width was there. So whatever this box one was there, so whatever the content of that thing was, it was there. That width was coming from that particular thing. Okay, so by default, the width is automatically calculated by browser, and that is taken from the content that is inside the box. Okay, so that's why you have this 36.67. Now if let's say I make this width 40, or let's moment I have this 40, as you can see, right now we have 42, 42, 42, 42. Okay, so this is kind of how we have. Now the thing is, this whole thing that you see here, that is 302 pixel. Okay, and this is 42, 42. 42 is coming because we also have the border, right? So each of the box has the border. So this is kind of something that you have to take into account. And this combined thing is 200 pixel, and the leftover space is 100 pixel, right? So that is the positive space that we are left with. So when you do this justify content as space between, so when you do this, so that leftover space is automatically divided, and that is kind of equally distributed in this manner. Okay, so each box has this empty space in between. So this is how that leftover space is kind of dealt with, right? So this is the whole idea here. Now that we have some understanding of the main axis properties, let's also let's also give some height to the container, so that we can have some understanding of the cross axis. Now for the cross axis, we have something called align items. Okay, and this is a property on the cross axis. So by default, what happens is the items are stretched. So it's each of the box that you see here, they are kind of stretched to the box which has the maximum height. So right now, each of the box, as you can see, it is automatically occupying the entire height of the box, right? We did not specify anything any height for the boxes. But what I want to do, I want to, let's say, align the boxes somewhere in the middle of this container. So what I can do, I can use this property called center, and this is automatically going to let me ignore that. This is automatically going to put that box in the middle of this thing. So it is kind of it is aligning that with respect to the cross axis. So in the middle of this container, so you are right now, what you are doing, you are shifting it on the cross axis on this direction, because this is the main axis, this is the current direction of the flex box. But right now, the moment you do this align items to center, you are shifting that box on the cross axis so that it aligns in the middle of this container. Okay, so this is what you're doing. Now let's say I also want to align this in this particular, in this direction on the main axis also, I want to put it on the center. So in that case, what you can do, you can use this center on the main axis, and this is going to do that for you. Okay, so right now element is in the middle of that entire container, right? So So on the cross axis, we brought the element on the center using the align item center, because align items is on the cross axis. Using the justify content center, we are shifting the element on the cross axis. Okay, so this is the whole idea here. This one deals with the uh, sorry, this one deals with the main axis. Okay, so this one deals with the main axis. This is something that you have to understand. This is the main axis, and this is the cross axis. So this property is on the cross axis. So I hope this is kind of like, making sense, because what happens, you'll start to get confused the moment you progress. So on the line items also, you have a few things. So you have like, text start. Okay, so the moment you have this flex start, it goes here on this at the very top, because and this is the cross axis direction, so it is going at the very top. And in the same way, you have this flex and stretch we saw. Now, apart from that, there are a few other things, but don't worry about those things. Um, because most of the time you'll have the center and all that thing. Okay. Now, let me show you something. So let's say this is my flex and right. Let's put it here. Now let me change the direction of the flex box. So the moment I change the direction of the flex box, notice what happened here. So this is my this is my now this is my main axis, right? And now this is my cross axis. So this is now like changed. Now the things have been reversed. Okay. Now this justify content will still apply this whatever thing that you have on the main axis only. So you have to visually think of main axis now in this direction whenever you are using the column, and the cross axis in this direction. That means this align item is now going to shift element on this and this. Okay, so this is the thing that I am talking about. So if I have to center it now, I'm going to use this center, and this is going to drag the element on the cross axis in this way, and now this is going to work. Okay, so this is how kind of like you can think of cross axis. So the moment you change the direction of the flex box, you are kind of like uh, visually have to think about this thing, so that you do not end up creating mess there. So this is how you can like consider it. Now apart from this, like like this is something that I wanted to show you, that there is flex direction and then you have this justify content and align items. Okay, now apart from this, you have this property called column gap. Okay, you have the property called column gap. So let me first let me just make it row. You have the property called column gap, and this is going to give you some gap between the boxes. So this is from each of the like whatever the thing is, then there will be some gap on that. Okay, so if I make it to like this column, notice here like right now you do not have any gap here. Okay, so in that case, what you can do, you can use row gap. Okay, because you do not have that thing. So the moment you do that row gap, you will have the gap on this thing. Okay, so this is something that you have to understand. Now what we do, we usually use a shortcut, and that shortcut is called a gap. Okay, so because most of the time we try to most of the time our use cases is in such a way that we expect to have like column and row gap in this way. You have this 10 pixel like as a row or column, so even if you change this thing, everything will work out in the similar way. Okay, so gap is the shortcut for saying column gap or row gap. Okay, and here also like you can specify two different values. So here you can specify this, and the moment you change that, notice here like the second property works for the row, first property works for the column. Okay, so that's why this 4 pixel is kind of like reducing that thing. Now there is another thing, and that is called the align content. Okay, align content, and I'll talk about align content very shortly. Right now I'm not going to confuse you, but now let's talk about some properties on this child. Okay, so let me first do one thing. Let me first get rid of this height, and let's also justify this content to flex start. I just want to go back to the initial condition that we have. So the default, whatever the default condition was, so I think, yeah, so this is the default condition. Okay, now what I want to show you, that right now we have the 100 pixel empty space. Okay, now what I can do by default, these things do not like grow. So if I want to grow that each of the box, I want to proportionally allocate some space to each of the box, so that all of them end up kind of like we end up occupying the entire container. In that case, what we can do, we can use this flex grow one. The moment you do this, notice what happens here. By default, the flex grow is 0. Okay, so by default it is 0, but the moment you set this flex grow to 1, what happens is your flex grow is kind of it's adding some space, whatever the empty space that was left, 100 pixel, that is proportionally in equal proportional is getting divided among each of the boxes, right? So that is what is happening here. Now what happens if on the fifth child, which is I have also another class s child right here. So on this s child, what I if I do, if I use this flex grow to let's say 2. Now notice what happens here. The moment I do 2 on this thing, this box 5 has the width as 72, but box this box 4, box 3, they have 57, right? So what is happening here? So the thing here, when you say the flex grow 2 and here you are saying flex grow 1, so that means on the fifth child, what you're saying, you're saying on each of the boxes, like proportionally, like you are saying 1:2. Okay, so that means on each of the boxes you want everything in 1:1 ratio, but on the fifth box you want the twice kind of in space. So it's kind of automatically it allocates some extra space to the box 5. So this is the idea here. That means flex grow proportionally allocates the positive space available inside the flex container to the elements. Okay, so this is the idea here. And flex grow is something that you can specify for each of the element, but right now I'm simply selecting all the things, so that is something that you have to understand. Okay, now let's say my width here is 150. Okay, now what happens here? So right now let's say my width here is 150. So the moment I have this 150, we now have the negative space, like we have the negative space situation, because each of the box is now 36, 36, 36. Okay, and notice here it is also violating our 40 pixel rule that we had specified, right? So why is that happening? So notice here, like one of the box is overflowing, and that overflow, that whatever this overflow area is, that is called the negative space. Now what we can do, we can kind of use the shrink approach, and we can kind of cut some space from each of the boxes, and we can kind of do some allocation. Now by default what happens is your this flex box has default shrink is applied, so you have this flex shrink, and by default it tries to cut the space equally. Okay, so that it can get rid of the negative space that is there. But the thing here is, right now our content width, which is the minimum width that we have, we cannot go below this thing, right? So if I do this, if I let's say if I say this min width min width as 0, notice what will happen. So the moment I do this min width as 0, everything is now kind of adjusted inside that flex container, right? So when you have this min width, when you disable this, automatically the content width is your minimum width, and what happens is you have some negative space outside, and by default this flex shrink is set to 1. That means from each of the boxes you are cutting down equal proportional, so that you can adjust the box inside that area, right? But what is happening here, since the content minimum width is already 36.67, so we cannot go far below that. That's why it is not able to occupy this entire thing, right? So in this situation, so let's try to fix this thing. So let's say let's make it 200 pixel. Okay, so the moment you do that, it is automatically like occupying this entire thing. Let's make it 300 pixel. And how much we can allocate to this thing, so let's say we have 50 pixel for each of them. Okay, now now that we have the fixed 50 pixel, let's make it 70 pixel. Okay, now notice what is happening here. So each of them are now 70 pixel, 60 pixel, 60 pixel, 60 pixel. But the thing is, they're not getting 70 pixel width that we have allocated, right? Why they're not getting? Because we are shrinking the width. Okay, so what we are doing, we are cutting down the negative space. So the moment I set the flex string to 0 and width is like 70 pixel, we are cutting down that empty space, whatever this negative space is, we are cutting down that using the flex string. Okay, so the moment you set it to 1, the negative space is proportionally cut down from each of the box, and that is then kind of like reduced, so that this entire element inside their container is and they occupy the entire space. So if I set it to 0 and if I, let's say, make it to 100 pixel, in that case, notice what is happening here. Like this box 4 and box 5 are kind of like overflowing outside that thing. Okay, so this is kind of like how you can use shrink approach. So you can use this shrink property in order to shrink the negative boxes, in order to cut down the negative space in equal proportion. And you can similar to the flex grow, you can use on that s child, and if you select each of the child using different class names, you can then apply different proportions, like how much proportion you want to allocate for each of the shrinkage. Okay, so that is something that you have to know. Now this width is something that is kind of that works as the flex basis. Okay, so there is property called flex basis, and this property is, if you do not have any width on the element, this flex basis is automatically taken from the content width. But if you want to allocate something, you can specify this as the 100 pixel, or this is automatically taken from the width property here if you have the width property. Okay, so automatically once you do that, automatically that is going to operate in the similar manner. Okay, so right now notice flex basis is something that is working like the width property. Okay, so this is how you can understand, like on the elements, on the flex elements, flex items, you have these three properties: flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Flex basis are fundamentally it first determines what should be the minimum width of that box. Okay, so by default it is auto. Okay, so by default it is auto, and this automatically determines how much width it needs to have in order to fill the entire container. This automatically determines that based on the content, and if you have width specified here, it is automatically going to take that as the thing. Okay, otherwise you can also specify it is in percentage, or you can specify 100 pixels, something like that. Okay, so these are like three things that you have to keep in mind, like these three properties are there. Now if let's say you want to use a shortcut, okay, so there is a shortcut to this, and you can use this shortcut, and this shortcut is called the flex, and here you can specify your this thing. So let me tell you what this means. So the moment you say this first property is flex grow, this automatically grow that thing, and this is called the flex shrink. Second property is flex shrink, and the third property is your flex basis. Okay, so this is something that you can do 100 pixel. Okay, so the moment you do this, notice the similar behavior here. So you can use this shorthand, and this is going to give you the similar approach. The first one is uh, flex grow, second one is flex shrink, and the third one is the flex basis. Okay, so this is all you have to know. So let me put this thing to auto. Now let me show you something. So there is something called, let me first bring back this console so that we can have some visuals here. So let me, first uncomment this part. Right now, as you can see, this is what's happening here. Okay. So let's first get rid of this part and let's make the flex basic. Let's call it 40 pixel. Okay, that means this is the minimum width that we want for each of the thing. But notice what is happening here. So we mentioned 40 pixel, but we are getting 36.67 pixel. Why? It's because the flex shrink is by default set to 1. So that's why we were unable to kind of so let me first, let's do one thing, let's write it here. Because of the comment it is not going to, so let's disable the flex shrink as well. So now it is 40 pixel. Okay, but by default it is set to 1. That means negative space is always kind of it is always going to come down. So right now we have each of them is 40 pixel, but what is happening here is the box 8, 9 and 10, they are overflowing out of this. Okay, now we have already seen that we can use that approach, but the thing here is it will try to do that, but at the moment if you shrink it here, so it is going to shrink you to 36.67 because that is the minimum content width. Okay, but what if we can make this particular thing. So let me bring this thing here. What if instead of putting them in one single line, we can break this box 8, 9, 10 into the new line? What if we do that? So how we can do that? So let me first comment this flex string. Okay, because it is already one. So in order to bring that thing in the new line, there is a property called flex wrap, and by default it is no wrap. That means it is not going to wrap it to the next line. Okay, but the moment you do this wrap, this is going to wrap the overflowing part in the next line. So this is kind of the first line is kind of one single flex, and you can imagine it as one single flex line, and the second one is the next flex line. So this is you can consider them as separate flex boxes, but it's kind of you have to simply visualize it. And here things become a little bit confusing, because the moment you get into two dimension, it's better to switch to grid layout. But if you think that your content can easily fit in this single one dimension, then flexbox is prefer flexbox. But even some properties are there so that you can deal with the two dimensional situations. So in this case we are simply switching from the overflowing, the instead of shrinking, what we are doing, we are simply breaking the thing into two separate lines. So we are using this property called flex wrap. Okay, now let's do one thing. Let's try to um, bring back this height. Now notice here what is happening. By default everything is already stretched in the align items direction, the cross axis direction. Okay, right now this is the main axis, this is the cross axis. Now here you can visualize it as you have two main axes here. Okay, so you can consider it that way. But settings will still be applied to on the boxes in that situation, that way only. Yeah, as if it is being placed in that main axis. Now when you have the two lines or multiple line, what you can do, there is a property called align content. Okay, so align items is for the item on the cross axis. Now this align content property, that is similar to align items, but what this does, it works for the combined group of the lines. Okay, so you can think of this as the combined group. Okay, so that means notice this particular setting is being applied to the combined group, it is not being applied to the one single element. So it is kind of it is getting applied to the combined group. So when you do this, let's start it is going to push everything to the top of that thing, and you have this flex end, it is going to push this to the last of that thing. So align content is a property which is used when you have multiple lines, flex lines, and then you can use this. And this is similar to align items, and it works in a similar way, but it is only applicable for the cases where you have this flex wrap and you have multiple things. Okay, so in that situation you can use it. Now that we have this thing, like let's try to learn about something called order. But first let me show you, there is a shorthand property for flex wrap. Okay, so sorry, is flex wrap and justify content. Okay, so sorry, flex direction and these things. So you have this flex flow, so this is shorthand. And here what you can specify, you can say that I want some, this to be column. Okay, let's get rid of this thing. And here what I want to specify is I want to specify wrap here. Okay, so the moment you wrap here, so flex flow is like shorthand for specifying your flex direction and your flex wrap. So by default it is no wrap. Okay, so it is no wrap, but the moment you do this wrap, it is automatically going to put it in this manner. Okay, so right now we are in the column direction, but if you have the row, if you want to make sure that it is going in this row, it is automatically going to be row. Okay, so this is the row. Now the thing here is you do not have to specify the second property unless you need that. But if you by default it will automatically be no wrap, because that is a default value. But if you use this flex flow as row, or you can simply use this flex direction, and that is something that you should be using instead of shortcut, because you will have some idea about how it works. Okay, and there are various shorthands. Okay, and I think with time you'll get used to those things. And if you're just starting out with flex boxes, you should not be using shorthands except for this flex thing that I show you, because that is that makes our life a lot easier. Now that we have this thing, let's get rid of all these 10 boxes here, so extra 5 boxes. And let me show you the concept of order. That's why I have this STL selected here. Now the concept of order is something that you can think of in what order you want to paint the boxes here. So if I say this STL, which is STL is the box 5, right? So this is the STL. So this is box 5. If I say that I want this to be order to be -1. So the moment I say this -1, this is going to give it the highest priority when it is painted on the screen. Okay, so notice here first we have this box 5, because the order starts from 0, 1, 2, 3. So you have this 5, and you have this box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4. Okay, so this that is box 5 is printed first, and then box 1, box 2, box 3. So if you have a situation where you have to show something in a sequential order, in some order, and you can specify on box 2, you can specify order 2, on box 3 you can specify box orders 1 or 0. So if you have a situation where you want to do something programmatically, in that situation you can use this order property. But let me show you something here. Right now in the body, sorry, is in the body we have the div, right? Notice here your order here, this order property does not determine the placement in the DOM. Okay, so in the DOM the box 5 is still after the box 4. Okay, the only thing that is different here is it is being painted in a different situation. So it's here you're simply telling browser how you have to paint that thing. So if you're using some creating a website, and you want it to be uh, friendly to the screen reader devices, in that situation you should always consider that how your tab behavior is going to work. Okay, because if a user is tabbing through each of the boxes, then you should make sure that that is friendly to the screen reader devices. Always keep in mind that this order is only for the visual, in this visual design. It is not for something that that's going to change the position of this thing in the DOM. So in the DOM, it is still after the box 4, but here in the screen, it is before that everything. Okay, so this is the like order property that you can use on flex, on the children. Okay, so this is all there is to flex boxes. Now the thing here is it will become very clear once you start practicing and build something. Okay, so here you can visualize this thing as profile cards, and then you can try to do something on your own. Now let's do some revision here. So first of all, there are two things. You have the flex container, which is the bigger box, and then you have the flex items. Okay, so each item has their their own property. On the items, you have properties like flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Flex basis by default is automatically calculated based on the content width, but you can also specify some width. So width can be in pixel or rem or percentage, etc. Flex grow and flex shrink. Flex grow determines how to distribute the positive space proportionally among each of the child. Okay, and on each of the child you can specify flex grow in different ratios. So you want, if you want something twice the that thing, so proportional, you can decide how you want to distribute the space. So flex grow determines the proportion. When you have one, that means equal proportion. If we have two on any child, that will get some extra space as compared to all other children. So this is space distribution for the positive space. Flex shrink by default is set to 1. That means it is going to reduce the negative space that is there. But if it cannot fill that thing container, then everything will overflow. Okay? So flex shrink is something that deals with the negative space. Okay. Now you also have the concept of cross axis and main axis. Cross axis is uh, perpendicular to the direction in which the flex container is laid out. So if you have row, then this is the main axis, and this is the cross axis. And if your flex direction is in this direction, the column vertically, then this is the main axis and this is the cross axis. Okay, and on the cross axis, you have the align items. Okay, and on the main axis, you have justify content property. Now you can also use flex wrap if you want to wrap things in the next line. Okay, if you want multiple flex lines, so in that case you can use flex wrap. The moment you have the flex wrap, you can use this property called align content. It works similar to the align items, but it works for multiple lines. That means for each of the flex lines, it's going to align them on this thing. Okay, now these are like a fundamental concept, and I think with practice everything will become very clear to you. And I think this was just a fundamental tutorial, but still I think this covers the entire concept. Now, I do not want to confuse you with further discussion on this thing, because there are various shortcuts available. So feel free to check that out. But apart from that, trying to write down these properties, once they are settled in your brain, you can simply start using shorthands and other things. And yeah, that is all there is to flex boxes. I'll see you in the next video on grid. And if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe. And yeah, make sure to comment